Our technology is well ahead of what people know. Because where I was, right place, right time, I saw some of that.
You occasionally still work at Area 51, right?
We call it the test site or the test range. Area 51 is just one component of that entire huge sprawling compound. During that time, a green orb type object had flown over, and that was where the weird shit started. We moved on down another hallway, and it had a marking on the wall and said off-world technology.
That's insane.
Metallic, basketball-sized sphere. Looked like it was just levitating above the podium. It looked unnatural. I'm looking at it, and it almost looked like a mirage type of effect. And above that display screen were these hieroglyphic symbols that I started to see appear. This is encoded in something deeper.
Way deeper. Welcome to maybe the most mind-blowing interview we've ever done at American Alchemy. It's with a Green Beret named Randy Anderson. Randy is an American badass. He's a complete physical specimen, having completed the notorious SEER and Q Special Forces qualification courses, both of which have very high failure rates. He's also an 18 Bravo Special Forces weapons sergeant who knows how to operate just about every gun under the sun. He wouldn't let me bring this up in our interview because of how much he cares about maintaining a humble, quiet Green Beret attitude, but there's a lot more I can say about Randy's battlefield accomplishments. Out of respect for him, I will leave that a mystery for you to speculate on. But why are we talking about Randy now? And why has he agreed to go on record? Well, for the purposes of this episode and our channel, which covers the nature of reality, in March of 2014, Randy was taken to a secret underground facility called the Off-World Technology Division at Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane. What he saw there changed his view of American technological capabilities and his worldview and understanding of humanity and its place in the universe forever. And now it might change your understanding of all of these things as well. Thank you so much for being here. I just can't tell you how much of an honor and privilege it is to be trusted with telling your story. It's one of the most profound, interesting stories I've ever heard. And I've heard of, given what I do, a lot of crazy stuff out there. And I think we both are aware of the fact that 2025 is going to be a pretty crazy year. I think a lot of stuff is coming down the pike. And, if there was ever a time for you to come out with your story, I think now would be it. And so we've been having conversations about that. And I just feel honored to be here right now. I think this is an amazing moment, and thank you.
Absolutely, man. You're the guy you're out there doing it, man. You're putting the story out there. You're telling people what's up, bringing awareness to it, and I think that's key, and that's why I wanted to do this with you.
And we have a mutual friend.
Yeah.
He goes by UAP Gerb. He has an incredible channel, and he introduced us, and so I just want to start off by giving him a huge shout out because he's one of the deepest researchers I've ever met when it comes to this topic.
I was thoroughly impressed with the amount of stuff he dug up on the place that I did the training at.
Absolutely.
It was wild.
Yeah. So shout out to Gerb, and I know you're going to be doing a follow-up with him. And so, just want to express my gratitude there. But let's get into your story because I think in some ways you are an ordinary American, and then in other ways you're an extraordinary American. And so I want to get into the ordinary elements. Where'd you grow up, and what were you like as a kid?
Oh, yeah. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is where I was born and raised for the first 10 years of my life. We moved to Las Vegas when I was pretty young and like 10, 11 years old. And I grew up there the rest of my life. So I did back and forth for a while with family. So most of my family's still back there. And then most of my young childhood, teenage years were all in Las Vegas.
And did you know that you ended up having this really impressive, amazing, thank you for your service, by the way, career in Special Forces? Did you know you wanted to get into that as a kid?
No, I thought I wanted to be a Navy SEAL because that's what everybody knows about. And I thought that was what the coolest thing you could do in the military at the time. And but I also wanted to be a fireman. That type of work always is what appealed to me when I was a kid, like any typical young American boy.
Yeah. You ended up becoming a Green Beret. And a lot of people know about Navy SEALs. There are a lot of public Navy SEALs out there. You have David Goggins, people like that, doing podcast circuit sort of stuff all the time. Green Berets are much less well known, and there's sort of a rivalry at times between the two.
Oh, we like it. We like it that way. We like being the true quiet professionals. I mean, it's a cultural thing. It's a cultural difference. I mean, I wouldn't say anything negative about the SEALs. They're a very professional organization. It's just culturally in Special Forces, Army Special Forces particularly, it's not very popular to talk about what you do. That's why this is super uncomfortable for me to talk about it publicly, but I think this is important enough to do it.
At what point did you become a Green Beret?
Yeah, so, well, when I was young, I was testing for the fire department in Las Vegas. I got hired for the fire department really young, 19 years old. And I did that for a few years. And in my early 20s, I was kind of feeling stagnant. I was a very motivated young man, and I always challenged myself to do the best I could. I was valedictorian of my firefighter academy. And I just felt like I was kind of getting stagnant. I was working at the busiest firehouse in the country. I was fighting fires all the time, but I just felt like I wanted to do more. The war was raging in the Middle East, and I was thinking still about that childhood dream of becoming a Navy SEAL, and I started looking into it and how I could do it without telling anybody. I kind of kept it a secret. I was married at the time too, so my wife's the only one at the time that knew that I was looking into it, because obviously I had to make sure she was cool with it. So I started digging in and finding out more about the Navy SEALs and talked to a SEAL recruiter. During that time, another friend of mine who was a firefighter for a sister department in Henderson, Nevada, which is right in Las Vegas. He told me that he was a SEAL, or a MARSOC guy. He was what do they call it? A corpsman for the Navy. Worked with MARSOC and the SEALs. And he told me to look into Green Berets. He said he thought it would fit my personality better. And he told me a little bit about what they do. And I was like, that sounds really cool. Looked into it, didn't know much about it before that. And I was like, that is definitely more of a fit for my personality and what I want to do. They do kind of everything.
Yeah.
Unconventional warfare, anything from counter drug to counterterrorism. Unconventional warfare is like going in with a guerrilla force and overthrowing a tyrannical government, for example. So that just seemed like a really cool, noble mission to me. And so it resonated with me, and I pursued it and luckily made it.
How old were you at the time?
I was like 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the main distinction? Because you said you grew up wanting to be a Navy SEAL. Why did you decide Green Beret over Navy SEAL? What's the main distinction between the two?
As I dug into both of the careers, Navy SEALs, there's movies out there, there's books out there. Green Berets didn't have a lot of information. I had to really dig to find out. And I thought that right there was cool to me. Like, I didn't want to do it to get some kind of accolade or recognition. I wanted to do it because it was doing the right thing and helping be part of the solution and fighting at the tip of the spear. I felt like, and so that's why I was drawn to it.
How intense was the initial training?
That's pretty brutal, as you can imagine. Like any of that type of training that's gonna weed out 90% of the people, it's pretty brutal. You go through all your basic training and all that stuff, and then you go through a selection phase, which is pretty difficult. And the last part of that phase is team week, and you're broken and beaten. I mean, everybody's got stress fractures, and I think I had hundreds of stress fractures in my feet by the end of it. And, you're still moving 20, 30 mile movements, throughout the day, and carrying an exorbitant amount of weight, like I think 175, 180 pounds through soft sand. It's just brutal. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet about it, but that's probably one of the more difficult physically demanding phases. But during the Q course, you have language phase. You got to learn a foreign language. You got to be fluent. You have 6 months to do that. That's difficult to do.
Do you know any foreign languages?
Yeah, I speak Indonesian and Malaysian.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Indonesian's not an easy first language to learn.
It's actually fairly easy.
It is.
Yeah, it actually,
that's
surprisingly.
Right. Isn't it sort of very, I'm going to use this word incorrectly, but almost interoperable? Like I have an old colleague named Eric Weinstein who always talks about how Indonesian's actually easy to pick up because it's like a few different core variables or something that account for the rest of the language. It's
fairly easy. The alphabet's identical. The sounds are slightly different, but any language is a lot of block memorization and then understanding like how you relate it to your native language.
Are there any things that you saw deployed in the field that, made you think twice as far as American capabilities? or adversary capabilities, just technology in the warfare context where you're like, I didn't know that existed.
100%. Yeah. So I think our technology is well ahead of what people know. I mean, I know it's well ahead of what people understand or think where we are significantly. Because just where I was, right place, right time, I saw some of that. And, yeah, there's technology out there that I think would blow people's minds if they knew that we had that capability. I mean,
any examples?
Yeah, the drone technology we have is pretty significantly better than people think.
Right now, as we speak, there's this mystery drone craze. I would say clearly that some of these are not man-made, but sure. That depends on your priors and understanding of a lot of the kind of weirder stuff. But what did you see, and what do you think we are capable of on the drone front?
I think what we're seeing, just my opinion, we're seeing our technology and drones respond to something that's not ours.
Are there any drones disguising themselves as other objects that seem prosaic? Have you seen anything like that?
Yes. There's technology that can be disguised to look like ordinary things that are drones and ISR surveillance type platforms.
That's pretty amazing. And so are the things, I'm assuming the things themselves are not shape-shifting. They are...
No, not that I saw.
Yeah, they're creating a signature that resembles something more kind of ordinary.
Sure, yeah, it's there to make you think it's something else. I mean, it looks like a local thing that would be normal to anybody who lives in the area.
So there's like a funny protest movement run by this like trolling kid on social media, and it's like birds aren't real, and it's like that the birds are all like CIA spooks or something.
I mean, hilariously accurate.
That's wild. So you think that there are drones that can maybe mimic? I mean, even in DARPA, there are initiatives towards biomimicry, and like a lot of biological designs have actually inspired aircraft design. Absolutely. But we're kind of taking this a step farther and saying that certain reconnaissance devices actually can appear to look like animal, like birds and stuff.
And why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't that be a natural way of disguising your technology, or what you're trying to monitor someone without them knowing you're monitoring them? Yeah, anything natural in the environment is where you'd want to hide that. So
it's pretty intense. You also have worked and occasionally still work at Area 51, right? The kind of legendary flight testing site. I think it was created in the 1950s, mainly actually to test, I think, originally the U-2, but then, other exotic aircraft on up from there. Just recently, another Green Beret was in the news under more unfortunate circumstances. Matthew Livelsberger executed a stranger-than-fiction car bombing, but with fireworks and a Cybertruck in front of Trump Tower in Las Vegas on New Year's Day 2025. After the incident, podcaster Sean Ryan had a guest on named Sam Shoemate, claiming that Matthew had emailed him, saying that the New Jersey drones that the entire country has been confused about for the last 2 months are actually state-of-the-art gravitic propulsion drones from China. Controversy ensued, but Sean Ryan and Shoemate have now been vindicated by the FBI. It looks like this email was, in fact, sent by Livelsberger, the Las Vegas bomber. Having said that, I don't think we should wholesale accept all of the contents of this email. Chinese electrogravitic drones carrying large payloads that could vaporize New York or DC at the drop of a hat, hovering with impunity around civilian airspace, feels hard to believe, or at the very least should be further investigated and not just accepted at face value. But here's where I probably break from the consensus. I am confident that the US and probably China have at least cracked anti-gravity in laboratory settings. I know that sounds insane, but if you don't believe me, check out my videos on the great mid-century inventor Thomas Townsend Brown and with aviation journalist Nick Cook. There's an abundance of open source evidence out there that we can affect gravity in clear ways with high voltage electricity. But I digress. How does any of this tie together with Randy's story? Well, the crazy connection here is this very weird email sent by Matthew displays the coordinates of America's Gravitic Propulsion's Operations Center. The coordinates are at Area 51. Now, this alone doesn't prove anything. You can Google Area 51's coordinates. The reason this is interesting is because Randy, who is also a Green Beret and our interview subject today, has worked at Area 51. And he told me off air that he's seen a black triangle hovering around at the notorious flight testing facility that he believed was employing exotic electrogravitic propulsion. What has that experience been like?
Anybody that works out at that area, we call it the test site or the test range. It's Area 51 is just one component of that entire huge sprawling compound base area. It's a testing range where they tested some of the first nukes, and it's a really cool place to check out historically. I mean, that's one of the coolest things I think about it is seeing those sites where they detonated nukes, where they had the Marines like embedded right next to where the explosions were going off, and they were dug in, and you can literally see the area where the explosion happened and where they were dug in, and benches where people sat and watched nuclear explosions go off and didn't realize how much danger they were in at the time.
I actually just did a piece with this guy, Robert Hastings, who wrote an amazing book called UFOs and Nukes. Yeah. And this guy documents 167 whistleblowers, guys who are cleared to some of our most sensitive stuff, and they're basically tasked with guarding the crown jewels of American defense and our nuclear assets. And they're screened for being the picture of mental health. In certain cases, they have their finger on the nuclear button. Yeah. And so they have to be on what's called the PRP program and report if they're taking ibuprofen, for God's sakes. Like they're, very of sound mind. And they consistently report seeing UFOs showing up not only in and around nuclear assets, but actually in and around the plume of nuclear blasts and atmospheric tests. And a lot of these guys are older. So I think atmospheric tests were banned at some point mid-century, but
right.
So if this was going on at Area 51, you have to think that, that's got to be a very interesting place as far as maybe UFO activity as well.
Well, sure. And I mean, I always wonder too, because it's a great place to test technology because there's not a lot of eyes on it. So it makes sense that that's what they'd use it for. And obviously that's what they did. The SR-71, the F-117 were programs I think were heavily tested out there. And then I'm sure a lot of the exotic tech is tested out there as well. But then there's also the stuff that we don't quite know what it is that's showing up, and I think it's incredibly interesting. And personally, I mean, being out there, so my role out there is to help as an opposition force for some units that are training for operations overseas, and that's about as deep as I can go into it. It's nothing super cool. It's fun, cool guy stuff to do for guys like us, the guys like me that like to shoot guns and get in a gunfight or pretend gunfight in this case, but and get to run into old buddies of mine that I worked with in special forces teams, and so it's cool. And while out there, we have had a couple crazy incidents. I'll speak to one in particular just because I don't think it's too crazy to speak about. But basically, I brought some of the guys out with me. We're operating under somebody's Q clearance. While out there, one of the commanders of the unit that was coming in by helicopter, unit landed, and one of the cadre that oversees their movement and kind of grading them on their performance and evaluating was standing next to some of my guys. And during that time, a green orb type object had flown over, and my buddy had seen it, and he looked up at the cadre that was there and asked him if he had seen it, and he looked down at my buddy and said, "Are you sure you saw that?" And my friend was like, "Yeah, I saw it as green orb." And he says, "Because if you did see it, we got a lot of paperwork to do." And my buddy kind of got the hint, and he said, "Yeah, maybe I didn't see it." And he's like, "That's better." And they kind of brush it off. So they obviously either knew what it was or knew not to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know either or. I mean, we sign NDAs and stuff going out there, so there's not much more we can say about it. But
sure.
It was interesting, and I've seen a couple things like that out there in my time working out there that are definitely cool.
Well, the lack of shock on behalf of that officer, I think, says it all, right?
Absolutely.
It seems kind of like a routine thing for him to have seen. In fact, there was a meteor expert at the University of New Mexico named Lincoln La Paz, and in 1948-49, he was basically studying green fireballs following the plume, radioactive debris post-nuclear blasts across the U.S. There's another guy, a researcher named Dan Wilson, who was also following up on this line of research. And so I think that's actually fairly common thing when it comes to ufology and UFOs. And Lou Elizondo has also spoken about green fireballs. And in fact, I've seen a green fireball with Lou Elizondo.
That's crazy,
as well.
Man. Yeah, you were mentioning that. What was that? What was the...
We were hanging out at Lou's place, actually, in Wyoming. And it was kind of later at night. We were like by his shed, just hanging out. And Lou is going deep on, and for the audience, for, who might need context on this, Lou Elizondo is a guy who ran the official UFO investigation program under Harry Reid. It was called OSAP, kind of, I guess, morphed into this program called ATIP. Mm-hmm. And he's since come out and kind of blown the whistle on some stuff around UFOs. And so, yeah, we're hanging out at his house, and he's going deep on how the sun is this nuclear fusion reactor, and specifically how it works and stuff. And then all of a sudden we just see, it's hard to kind of place distance on these things, but we see this green fireball just shoot out into the sky.
What the heck?
And we're just like, what the, like, this couldn't be weirder as far as what we're talking about, who we're with, and seeing this happen.
So, dude, like, I know for a fact, for me, since my experience, I've definitely seen more stuff than I didn't see anything before that. I never noticed. Maybe I wasn't looking, but now I see shit all the time.
That feels like the dirty little secret in UFO world, because it feels like a lot of people downplay their personal experiences because they want to maintain this like impartiality of like, I'm this perfect scientist.
Yeah.
But the more you notice the thing, the more it does start to happen to you. And the deeper you get, you have a couple of drinks with, anybody in this field, they start to say, yeah, things have gotten kind of trippy once I've started to look into this, which makes sense, right? Like you have the video of like, I think this like gorilla going across this video. And if you're not focused on the gorilla, you don't see the gorilla, you know what I mean? So your attention is somehow fundamental to what you experience in life. Mm-hmm. So that sounds like that's happened with you as well.
It's probably that same phenomenon, like you buy a red car and then you see red cars or whatever, whatever type of car you buy, you see that type of car all of a sudden everywhere.
Exactly.
Maybe it's just that we're looking now and we're more aware of it, so we're seeing it.
Yeah. Tony Robbins, I think, was interviewed by Theo Vaughn, and he was like, notice everything red in the room. Yeah. And if you were to do that right now, you notice everything red in the room, and then you close your eyes.
I remember this. What did you see that was brown?
What did you see that was brown? You wouldn't really remember, but you would remember the red thing. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think anyways, it's super fascinating, but that's wild. So you experienced that firsthand at Area 51. Any other technology? I mean, one area that might be worthy of discussion is one of the top 5 episodes for Joe Rogan. And the subject of a lot of mythology and lore in UFO world is Bob Lazar,
right?
Who claimed to work at Area 51, a special compartment of it called S4.
Yeah,
nobody knew what Area 51 was before Bob Lazar came out, and so a lot of people are like, his story is totally legit. By the way, he claimed to basically work on reverse engineering UFOs,
right?
And he's all sorts of interesting stuff, like element 115, which is this stable version of Moscovium, was used for the propulsion. He talks about gravity A, gravity B, but he also was shown things about bodies being containers of souls and just all sorts of trippy out there stuff.
That's wild, man. Yeah, so like I've dug more into this stuff just since the experience, and I mean, I don't know about Bob Lazar's story, if it's true or not. I mean, it seems like he's telling the truth. It seems genuine. But I don't know if you're going to talk about your theory on that, but I think that's pretty cool, man. And I'd lean into that pretty heavily as far as like, that's probably what's going on, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I'm happy to say it.
Okay. Yeah, I think you should.
Well, yeah. I mean, I want to focus this back on you.
Okay.
You're the real guest of honor, but I will. I think that Bob Lazar was kind of a limited hangout of a person, and so. What I mean by that is he would provide high-level frameworks where, it's like that cicada challenge or whatever for the NSA or something, or is the NSA or CIA or something, where it's like, if you have a really impressive mathematical and like puzzle, piecing ability or whatever online, you get it and you get recruited or whatever. And so Bob Lazar comes out, he says gravity A, gravity B, he says all these things about, stable versions of these, elements that like we're not aware of. And if you investigate that and jump the bar to the, where you show a level of prowess or ability with these highly technical concepts and actually kind of read the tea leaves on them, then maybe you get recruited to the program.
100%. The reason why I think this is important for you to bring up, the reason I dug into that a little bit with you is because this type of stuff happens throughout the military as well. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to give an example of that if I could.
Yeah.
And also because I think it ties into maybe possibly why I was exposed to what I was exposed to.
Okay.
And I'll bring that full circle, but there was one point in the Q course, and again, the Q course is a training program to become a Green Beret. They randomly, and this isn't uncommon, so it didn't strike me as odd at the beginning of this. They just told us we were going to do a run, and they said, just run until you're told to stop, do your best, right? It's a common way of them evaluating you. You don't know how far you're going to go, do your best. That's that adds a level of stress, okay? And that's what they're trying to do in a lot of these cases. So you start running down a path, a soft sand trail, which sucks to run on. And during the run, I remember as I'm going along the route, the trees had something posted on trees as I was running. And one tree had like a face posted, like a image, headshot of somebody. I noticed it. And then another tree had a red 7. Another tree had a blue 3. Another tree had another face. And so there's just every so often another tree had something posted on it. And so I'm mentally noting this, like significant for some reason.
Yes.
And at the end of the run, it just ended up being like a 6-mile run for time. People that did well on the run got sectioned off. People who didn't got sectioned off. And people who did well on the run got brought to an area where we took a test. And the test was all the red numbers add, all the green numbers subtract, and which faces did you see? And so you go through and you do this quick test, and then people that did well on the test sectioned off and so on. Mm-hmm. And it was an evaluation for another unit in the military above, these units. And so they do that. They do that kind of stuff often, at least in the military. So I don't see why an agency like the CIA wouldn't recruit people the same type of way.
Makes sense.
Evaluate you without you realize you're being evaluated. You're going to get a genuine, you're going to get genuine good people or good at what you're looking for them to be good at.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not enough to tip the hat to the adversary and might even throw them off the trail in a sense, but to some like initiated elite, person, then all of a sudden you get into the program or something.
Yeah. I think those type of tests happen often, especially in the military and especially at the level of special operations. I think they're looking for guys that display certain characteristics to do other work.
Yep.
And if they identify that, then you end up, and I think maybe that's why I ended up seeing what I saw. Maybe something triggered something that they said, let's see. And that happened.
So why don't we set this up for the audience? What is Naval Surface Warfare Crane, and why were you there to begin with? Yeah, so I didn't have any particular knowledge about that. It just ended up being the place where we were doing this training. This particular course was to do some advanced weapons training. My job in Special Forces was an 18 Bravo. 18 Bravos are your weapon sergeant on the team, and your responsibility is to be proficient on hundreds of different types of weapon systems, foreign and domestic weapon systems. And that's everything from handguns, rifles, up to rocket launchers and recoilless rifles, mortars, any type of man-powered weapon system. So you can work over like 100 weapons yourself.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
But it's just what you do. That's what your focus is. So so this was just another course, and one of the focuses of this particular training was the Mark 44 minigun. Okay. That's a somewhat complicated weapon system. So it requires an extra level of training, and we were there going over that. The SCAR had a new iteration of it, and we were going over that. So it's just going over special operations, SOCOM weapons. Yep. And more advanced training, like becoming an armorer on some of those weapon systems, which allows you to do a higher level of care and maintenance for the team.
Were you there with a unit, or?
I was there with a group of guys. Some guys there were armorers for their unit, some tier 1 units, some special operations units, some guys were a couple other Green Berets. There were only a few of us, me and one other guy that ended up exposed to what we were exposed to. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I want to show you this.
Yeah.
I think it's important to the validity of what I'm saying. So I don't know how you want to.
Yeah. Well, for the intense skeptic out there, you have Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane Division, and Randy M. Anderson. So There you go.
Yeah. And it's in my DD214 as well, which is I'll provide you with. And
it's in your what?
My DD214.
DD214. Okay, so that's your record.
Yeah, everything done in the military is documented there. So
you were clear. You were there.
By all intents and purposes, man, it was a normal, actually kind of rundown facility. It's huge. Crane, Indiana is in the middle of freaking nowhere.
And it's also known for its naval readiness in general, right? It's part of the NAVC program. And I've heard, I don't know if this is true or comports with your understanding, but that there's some coordination between Crane and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
It makes sense based on some of the stuff that happened. And there's also a civilian company that was tied to it that's tied to some exotic stuff as well. So kind of dig into that and see.
Well, there's SAIC. Is a very interesting contractor with some history in that area. And I'm friends with actually Navy Special Warfare guy. And he'll say some pretty interesting stuff to me. He'll say like the Air Force guys, those guys talk. Yeah. And he's like the Navy guys, they never speak and they experience way more weird. He was like, look at the tenure of nuclear Navy engineers. And he was like, tell me like that's not the highest churn job you've ever experienced. He's like, those people are seeing crazy stuff underwater in these nuclear subs. And you think about it, all the stuff around UFOs and nukes, people with Q clearances, they're above land.
Yeah.
If you're in this contained vessel,
it'd be terrifying.
Yeah. In some remote, part of the world or whatever. Right. And then you see, some sort of non-human entity sort of try to disrupt your comms or shut down your power. I mean, right?
I'm out.
Right?
If I can't shoot it.
Yeah. Pretty crazy. So you're doing like kind of combat training stuff at Crane.
Yeah, weapons training.
Training. Then what happens?
A couple days into the training, we were doing really well. Me and this guy were doing very well. And we got pulled to the side at the end of the day on a regular training day. And we stayed after and we're talking with the cadre and instructors. And somebody else had come into the room and we thought we maybe were just getting some extra stuff because we were doing well. And they ended up telling us we're going to go check out some foreign weapons. We went to another part of the facility, went to another building. In that building, we went into an elevator. We took an elevator down, which that was the first odd thing is that it felt like we went down significantly further than like you would think you would. I mean, it was just awkward. It just stood out.
You went way underground.
I don't know if it was way, but it was further down than like a few floors, so I don't know how far, I don't know how fast the elevator was going. I didn't know I needed to pay attention to it at the time. It's just something that stood out to me that we were going underground. Yeah.
And these are pretty well documented now across America, underground military facilities. And so, so you're going underground. Did you know that there was an underground complex at Crane before this? Okay.
Absolutely not. Nope, wasn't briefed on it, didn't know about it, didn't have
So what's going through your mind at this point? You're going down underground in an elevator with these random instructors.
Well, at the end of the day, man, I'm a soldier and I do what I'm told, so I'm just following orders and just going and, okay, we're going to go here, go stand there, do this. But I'm observing, I'm kind of, it's starting to feel different, The mood has definitely become more serious. The people we were with seemed serious, and me and the other guy were just being quiet and not showing any emotion as we're trained to do. So we get under there, door opens, we go through a security type checkpoint. I remember the first thing that stood out to me was that it was significantly more modern than everything up top. Yep. And that was odd. The lighting and everything seemed more modern, just seemed more upkept. Yeah,
kind of state of the art.
Mm-hmm. It was very streamlined how things operated down there. So you could tell it was like very regimented. Just like you walk on this, everybody walked on the right side to go down the hall. Like people coming this way walked on their right. Mm-hmm. It's just, and there was like a line on the wall that you follow to different areas. You know how like the hospitals sometimes have like a line to follow to the emergency room. It was kind of that seemed like it was that. I mean, I wasn't 100% paying attention to that. I was just had observed it upon getting down there. We moved through a security checkpoint, and then we started looking at some foreign weapons stuff, and they were telling us about some Russian and Chinese weapon systems that were captured. I don't want to go too into the details on this stuff. It's still within too kind of close proximity to that.
Sure.
That I don't want to go too far. But basically, it was pretty advanced stuff that they had been using that was captured probably, I would assume, by agency types that were operating in the area and had come across stuff that it seemed exotic. It wasn't anything that would strike me as beyond what I'd expect us to find or people to have the capability of making. But it was interesting for sure. Just the type of ammunition and the way the weapon systems operated. There was some
kind of exotic, unconventional.
Yeah, unconventional.
Yeah,
I would say not so much exotic, but unconventional for sure.
Okay.
And so we talked about that for a little bit, and they kind of I felt like it was sort of evaluating our thoughts on it, maybe seeing, we are weapons experts, and so maybe they just wanted another set of eyes on it, and maybe just evaluating to see what we came up with. Maybe they were evaluating us for see what we could find out about. I don't know.
Right.
It's, like I said, I've thought about this a lot. And
maybe they knew and they were testing you.
Exactly.
Maybe they didn't know and they genuinely wanted your help.
Sure.
There's a whole host of possibilities.
Absolutely. And I don't want to say it was one of the, I don't know.
Sure.
But again, we did that for a bit. And then,
at any point, did you say, "Hey, why are we down here?"
Hell
You're just
no.
kind of, yeah.
And you wouldn't. You wouldn't. It's not the way things are done. So you just do.
Yeah, totally.
You just do the thing.
And if you're ever going to be denied access to the most interesting stuff, it's by asking questions like that, probably.
Yeah,
So
I'd bet.
You probably just want to kind of go with it at that point. Okay, so you're looking at this exotic, or not exotic, but unconventional adversary technology.
Yes. And again, it was really interesting, and I think we came up with a couple ideas of what we thought about it and purpose and functionality, and then they kind of, the two guys we were with spoke for a little bit, and then and again, I'm a lot of this is me trying to remember, and so I don't know if I'm getting everything perfect, but in hindsight, looking back, I would assume maybe they were deciding if we were going to go further.
Yeah.
And they ultimately decided we would, I guess, because we went down and ended up going through another security checkpoint, which that was odd because we'd already gone through a significant level of security. And so I thought that was odd. This was more like going into a skiff.
Okay.
What I would compare it to. And when you do that, everything you take your watch off. Anything electronics gone.
Yep. So for the audience, SCIF is Secret Compartmentalized Information Facility.
Correct, yeah.
And it's like a Faraday cage on steroids, so that any comms
good
that
analogy.
take place within the SCIF are completely offline.
Anything that goes into the SCIF
can't come out.
And so it's just a very protected facility for good reason. And so it was that level of security, which is the highest level of security I've seen or dealt with. And so that was strange too, because we'd already gone through a pretty robust security checkpoint to get under there.
And are they checking your clearance at each point? Or?
No. I mean, that's already done when we got to the training, so they know who we are.
Yeah.
And it was more just like, do you have anything right now on you? Yeah, that's what it felt like.
Like a TSA on steroids sort of situation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then you go through that. You put your stuff in a box. It gets locked into a box, and then you go through another checkpoint area, a scan, and whatever else. Right. Not uncommon, but seemed highly unusual for this. Mm-hmm. After that, we moved on down another hallway and got into an area that had a marking on the wall and said off-world technology.
It said off-world technology.
That's
insane.
And so immediately my bells go off.
Was it engraved? Or was it?
No, it was.
Did it look like it was written in marker or something?
No,
or
it was. But it wasn't like it was like permanent. It was like somebody like stuck a placard in, kind of.
Okay.
So I don't know. It could have been a setup. It could have been something just thrown together.
Sure.
But it could have been something that's just how they had.
But it said off-world technology.
Yeah, that obviously immediately started to feel what the fuck is going on, right? So me and the guy are looking at each other. The other guy that's there, he's another Green Beret. We're like, what the fuck? Kind of giving each other that look. And that was where the weird shit started. We go into the room, and the one room, these significantly higher level of technology, like the lighting even looked, everything was just, it was more, it was just a different vibe, man. I don't know how else to describe it. Like I said, the lighting was different. The walls had like maybe I would assume some type of Faraday material. Like everything was just a higher level of detail. You know? The first object was a metallic basketball-sized sphere, and it was above a podium, and looked like it was just levitating above the podium.
Levitating above the podium. Mm-hmm. So there was space between the sphere and the podium itself.
Correct. And I remember at one point, like, trying to angle myself, like, what? How is that?
Do you think it could have been some sort of magnetic levitation? Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
But it's just levitating there.
It was just levitating above it.
Did it look like a prosaic, like this wood table where if you were to, touch it, it would act like a normal object? Did it look holographic? What did it look like?
That's a good question. Then what stood out to me was the way the metal looked. It looked unnatural. And I talked with Gerb about this, and he kind of dug in on this. I mean, I'm like, dude, I don't know how to describe it. Yeah. All I can tell you is it didn't look natural. It didn't look like anything I could compare it to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So look, it almost looked like off-world.
It fit the bill.
Yeah.
And then also there was and this could have been anxiety or anything else, but the energy in the room, man, was just different.
What was the feeling you got looking at this thing?
Just an uneasy, uncomfortable, ominous. That's the best way I can describe it.
Did it feel powerful or conscious, or did it feel like this inanimate object? Or
it didn't feel inanimate. It didn't feel conscious. It just felt like this was significant, and it could have been the way that they brought us in. It could have been all the buildup. It could have been that.
Do you have any extra context at this point? Did the instructors at any point, are they in the room with you, by the way?
They are acting like this is a normal Tuesday. And that's what fucked me up even more. Like that was oddly very strange, man. Like this, I hadn't been exposed to anything like this before that or since. So,
and they didn't say, hey, so what you're about to experience is kind of trippy. They just took you into this room.
They just, and maybe that was part of the point. It could have absolutely just been something that triggered on a evaluation for me and this guy. And they brought us out there to see if we'd react to the technology. That could have been a part of it.
Do you ask them at any point?
So after a moment, have a moment to like kind of drink that in, and then they were talking about, and they were kind of talking to us and each other. It felt just weird, man. Almost like they were purposely making it awkward.
Yeah,
I would say, but maybe it's just because I was in a weird situation.
Do you know anything about these instructors as far as like, do they have physics background or military background?
Most of them have military background. A lot of them come out of the same type of special operations that we were in, at least some of them. But they are civilian contracted companies that are working for, for Crane.
Gerb has come up with some really interesting research around how this is possibly SAIC and how they've done some contracting work with Crane in the past. And SAIC is pretty deep in consciousness research. In fact, they were the CIA has a psychic spy program. This is fully, by the way, declassified and known and on record. Psychic spy program, it ran from 1972 to 1995. Probably some version of it is still going on today. I have trouble believing that, they actually sunsetted it fully. And
why wouldn't they? It was successful.
And you have, people like Joseph McMoneagle, who's remote viewer #1, who won the Legion of Merit for over 200 instances in which he added to military intelligence. In fact, you have a quote from Jimmy Carter, who's president from 76 to 80, saying, "The craziest thing that I've ever experienced in my presidency was a remote viewer." Her name, I believe, was Rosemary Smith. Yeah. Basically, there was this Tu-22 spy plane, Russian spy plane, that had downed. It had gone down in Africa. All of Africa is the target. And this woman draws a 3 square mile radius in Zaire where they find the plane. And he freaks out. And there's an audio of him saying this. And so for anybody out there, you should look into this. This is a real program. SAIC in Palo Alto was running a lot of the operations later for Stargate and the psychic spy program. So they're extremely interested in this. And our friend, UAP Gerb, has dug up a lot of research around SAIC's work with Crane. And there are other instances, by the way, of tests going on with people and their psionic connection. And there's a guy named Chris Bledsoe you're probably familiar with.
Yes.
North Carolina.
Yes.
A guy named
Crazy story.
Crazy story.
Yeah.
And a guy named Tim Taylor is a NASA mission controller. We were talking about him last night. Shows up in Bledsoe's life.
Yep.
Shows him a piece of space material. And somehow Bledsoe knows that it's like not from here.
Yeah.
And then and there's this interesting kind of reaction. And then Tim Taylor says, "Why you?" or something. Like he knows that at that point Bledsoe does actually have this genuine psychic ability or something.
Well, dude, that's funny that you bring that up because I 100% when I saw that sphere could say that I would, if I had no other context, even though I had the off-world technologies label, if I had none of that, I would have been like, that's not from here.
Right. More context or corroboration that maybe your story isn't happening in a vacuum. There's a story of Uri Geller where, again, say what you will about the guy. I think there might have been some snake oil in some of the stuff that he was doing, but he was brought over by a guy named Andrei Puharich, who was part of consciousness research going on in the US, but also was doing weird MK Ultra stuff as well.
Right.
He brings over Uri Geller. Uri Geller has a crazy story with Wernher von Braun, who's the father of the German and American space programs, ran our Saturn program that took us to the moon, where von Braun shows him, a piece of space material in a safe. And Uri Geller is able to deduce that this is not from here or whatever. And so this seems to be kind of this recurring trope.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely felt that when I saw the object. I did not say that. And I think they were trying to see if we had a reaction to it. And I mean, because there was an awkward moment of silence, like I said, and then they started talking about it, and maybe they were discussing it to get further reaction out of us, but they started talking about that it was recovered from a craft that had crashed.
They said that.
They did say that.
Wow. So they said this orb was actually recovered from a craft,
yeah.
but it itself was not the craft.
Correct.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So what do we think? I mean, did you extrapolate anything from that as far as what role the orb played in the craft's overall working?
So I want to be careful how what I say I remember and don't remember, because this was a while ago, but I want to say I remember them talking about it being a control mechanism for the craft, some type of control mechanism for the craft. And I don't remember if they had said that to each other or to us. Like I said, there was kind of a two-way conversation happening. They were talking a little bit back and forth to each other, and then giving us bits of information also. So I don't remember exactly how that came out, but I do remember them saying that it was potentially part of a control mechanism and that it interacted with consciousness. I wanted to ask a question. I didn't, but I'm like, how would they know that?
Right. Wow. So, okay, you see this orb. It's levitating on this podium. Then what happens?
So we spent a little time there, and then we went to the next object, and it was another metallic object, very, very strange looking, same type of vibe. It's hard to describe because it didn't get a full view of it, but it looked like something you could like reach in and grab and pick up, and maybe it was something that would you could put on your arm. Or so something that would have to use it with their arm. That's the best way I can describe it.
Like a gauntlet.
Like a gauntlet. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Or maybe something that would like be like a shield. But and it had like a crystal type of display screen. Or I don't know if it was a display screen. It was a square, rectangular. Looked like it would potentially be a display screen, and it was not levitating. It was sitting on a table. And at that point, like I'm looking at it and it almost looked like a mirage type of effect. And in that, above that display screen were these hieroglyphic symbols that I started to see appear.
What?
Yeah.
Hieroglyphic symbols.
That's the best way I could describe them.
And
I don't know what they were.
Anything going through your mind at this point as you're seeing?
Yeah, I was shitting bricks. I mean, yeah, it was terrifying. I mean,
and are you trying to figure out?
I'm just trying to be cool, man.
Yeah,
I'm trying to not look like I'm trying to act normal.
Yeah,
I don't know what's happening. I don't know what this is for. I'm just trying to just act like everything's fine.
Yeah. And In retrospect, have you been able to deduce what any of these symbols were, or draw them up, or what they mean? Or
so I've randomly, like I told you, I meditate and all this stuff now, and during meditations I've had a couple times where I've thought about it and they've come into my thoughts. Also, the lawyer
Danny Sheehan,
yeah, he had talked about them, and he had drawn some that looked a lot like what I saw.
A lot like what you saw.
Yeah.
So for context for the audience, Danny Sheehan in 1974 or 5 was taken into a skiff, again, secret compartmentalized information facility in Washington, D.C., I believe at the behest of the incoming Carter administration, so it might have even been 76, and he was shown basically the Blue Book files.
Right.
And he's looking through the Blue Book files, and he sees this UFO crashed into the side of a mountain.
Okay.
And it's the dead of winter, and there's some Air Force officers present. And he sees on the rim of the UFO these hieroglyphic symbols.
The UFO had crashed into this field, and there was snow, and the dirt was all turned up and stuff. And the UFO itself was stuck in the side of this big embankment. In one of the photos, I could see these symbols that were all around the base of the dome. And I took out the yellow pad and I opened it up to the inside cardboard of it, and I slid it under the microfiche machine, and I focused it so that I could see the symbols. And then I traced the symbols exactly, verbatim, all the way around the half of the dome that I could see, and I just I just traced all of them.
I saw that show, and what he had drawn is very close to what I seen. And also, I want to touch on something else that this correlates with. Documentary that I saw on YouTube about DMT.
Yeah.
And these guys were doing experiments with DMT, and they found that everybody was seeing these same symbols when they shined a laser a certain way and kind of diffracted the laser.
Yep.
In a way that you do like the double slit experiment.
Yes.
And in the diffraction, they saw these symbols, and those symbols are the same.
That's fascinating. Yeah, Danny Jones does this amazing show on this, and these guys they're doing DMT. They're showing a laser in a specific way exactly to create this diffraction effect, and then their kind of interpretation of this is like they're seeing almost like the source code, like a binary code behind what we're seeing, which that sounds absolutely absurd. But if you take physicists like John Wheeler seriously, or people like Claude Shannon, who was really more kind of information theory, but like maybe the universe is more information theoretic at its core, and we are rendering it in real time. And maybe when you take DMT, you ascend into these higher states, and you can actually look at the source code itself. It's fascinating.
And what does it mean then if that source code is in the same language of whatever
what you saw.
I saw on that device and whatever Danny saw on that craft?
That makes me think that these things off-world might be a slight misnomer, and it might be an interior fabric to the reality that we're in every day, or something even more fundamental to what we're seeing, or something.
Probably touching on something.
But when you're looking at these hieroglyphics, you obviously don't have the context of the Danny Sheehan interview or whatever.
Nothing at that point.
So what's the first thing that goes through your head as to like what this is?
Well, first thing is like, am I hallucinating, or am I seeing that? I was squinting and looking at it, and I think even one of the guys who was with us had asked me, like, because he saw me looking at it, had asked me if, like, everything all right? Or I don't remember exactly what he said, but he kind of inquired to why I was looking at it, and I was like, oh yeah, and I just kind of brushed it off and forgot about it. But I mean, not only did I see the symbols, but they were like changing to different symbols. So there was a movement to them as well. So they weren't just like static.
It's almost like they were shuffling in and out.
You ever see
or like in the
Predator?
Yeah.
You know how when he has that little communicator thing, and he's like gonna blow himself up, and it does a little countdown.
Yeah.
I kind of look like that.
Do you feel like it was like a holographic display, or like the technology showing it? Did it feel prosaic, or did it feel like just something you'd never seen before as far as the display itself?
Holographic sure could have been, but it was very crisp. Like where I feel like the holographic technology I've seen at like CES or whatever, it's almost like kind of hard to.
Like you can see that it's a light.
You can tell that it's not. Yeah, that it's not a solid object. Or not a physical object.
Yeah. So you could see in that case that it was like a light display, and in this case, Does it almost feel like it's like part of reality itself?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Wow. And oh man, there's so many places to take this. Like we were talking last night, and a lot of the early cryptographers, if you look at like, I think he's a 14th century guy, Trithemius, would write about cryptography in the context of angel communication. And even today, like we're in LA right now, there are all sorts of people who say that they feel like they're communicated with by ETs or angels. Maybe those are, the same thing.
Yeah.
Via these like, numerology, 111, 222, 333, all sorts of people sort of say things like that, and you can kind of laugh it off. But that is actually a long-standing tradition. Queen Elizabeth had a chief spy and magician.
Right.
His name was John Dee, and he claimed to communicate with angels via what he would call Enochian language. And I showed you some of these symbols.
Yes.
Aleister Crowley said, similar thing, and he's probably a darker version of this.
Right.
Not necessarily the most savory guy, but he would communicate with these, through Enochian language. And you said that these symbols looked somewhat like what you had seen.
Yes. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. I have a whole bunch of different perspectives that I think about because of seeing all this stuff after the fact.
Yeah.
And our minds are very fallible, and so I don't know how much, I don't want to over speak it and add something that's not true on accident.
Well, I think the core details are remarkable unto themselves.
So I like trying to keep it to that because I don't want to screw with it, but it would appear like it's some kind of communication tool, or it's for sure it's trying to tell you something.
Did you feel like anything got downloaded into you, or you received a message or something?
Not at that point. What definitely I could say after the fact is that it changed everything for me after that. And I don't know that it was because of the objects or because of what I was exposed, or if it was just because it made me think differently and led me down a different path.
So what happens at that point? Do you turn to these instructors and you say, hey guys, what the hell was that? You just get let out of the room? What happened?
Yeah, so we discussed a little bit more stuff. I remember they spoke about the object a little. It got brought up that somebody was potentially harmed in the retrieval of that item.
Okay. The gauntlet or the orb?
Yeah, the second item, that it had discharged some kind of energy, that somebody had been harmed or even possibly killed, and they were discussing that. And then we went back through the security checkpoints. We got upstairs. We were told not to discuss it with anybody else in the class. They were pretty serious when they told us that. And I'm pretty sure in our initial, whenever you go to like a military course, initially like the first day or two is like admin stuff. Mm-hmm. And so you're filling out all your paperwork and getting everything ready to start the class and the training. And so I'm sure you don't read all that stuff, especially when you go to class after class. So I'm sure we signed NDAs and stuff in that beginning part. We didn't sign anything additional after that. So there was nothing remarkable about that. We were just told not to discuss it with the class or not to discuss it outside of that.
So that was it.
That was it.
Go back to your normal life.
Go back to your normal life. I never was exposed to anything else again. It never got brought up again. I never spoke to the other Green Beret again. He was from a different team, different group. And we never spoke about it again.
I now personally know from some contacts in Navy Special Warfare that Naval Surface Warfare Crane does deal in the most exotic adversary weaponry. It also deals with the DOE, the Department of Energy, and our nuclear capabilities. And it frequently coordinates with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is just a 3-hour drive away. In fact, my contacts told me that if Wright-Patterson is the center of the Air Force's most exotic off-world reverse engineering efforts, Naval Surface Warfare Crane is the center of the Navy's off-world reverse engineering efforts. All of this just further corroborates Randy's story. And where have we heard of off-planet technology before? Well, Harold Malmgren, a top advisor to JFK, Nixon, LBJ, and Ford, claimed that he was personally briefed on other world technologies by Richard Bissell of the CIA. This story is a huge deal given Malmgren's unimpeachable credentials, and Richard Bissell founded and set up Area 51 on behalf of the CIA. Could Malmgren and Bissell's other world technology now be called off-world technology? The same off-world technology that Randy saw? Why come out now, and why talk to me about it?
A good friend of mine, Mike Herrera, came out. I saw David Grush was brave enough to come out. That guy had some really high level information, and took a lot of risk doing that. And who am I to protect my little story? I think it's important as part of the story. I think it's important to tell it because it adds to the credibility of all these guys that are doing it. So I just think it's the right thing to do. Hopefully there's other people that can explain what that was. I mean, that would be some nice closure for me to be able to find out if that was actually off-world tech.
How has your life changed since that experience? Because even though you weren't able to speak about it again, you never experienced anything like it where you were maybe shown secret tech in a classified facility. I can imagine that just being extremely ontologically shocking to the point where your aperture, your measurement tool, that is, what you see and are interested in, opens up.
Well, I mean, yeah, immediately that changed for me. I got back that night later than everybody else, obviously, to the barracks, and I couldn't sleep, and I stayed up all night thinking about does this mean aliens are real? Like, what does this mean? And I just, it was absolutely shocking to my state of awareness and my belief systems, and it took a bit for me to wrap my mind around that. And what helped was it kind of sent me down the rabbit hole of all this stuff. I started digging into the other stories. I started taking them maybe more seriously and not just brushing them off as bullshit. And so it did open my aperture. It did allow me to start looking at other things. Then I started we talked about the Stephen Greer stuff, and he talked about consciousness and meditation being a component of communications. I started meditating. And all those things have helped benefit me in my life in significant ways.
So it's almost been healing in some sense or something.
Initially it wasn't, and because of that, I think it ultimately turned out to be, yeah.
I think that's a common story of you experience something kind of paranormal, it shocks you, it busts you out of your comfort zone. And then you realize your comfort zone was actually kind of limited and not always the most positive orientation towards the world. And this opens you up to all these other possibilities, and can be dark and scary and lonely, but it also leads you down kind of a more spiritual path.
I think the big component of that was I was so in my ego at those times. Like, obviously I did jobs like being a fireman and being a Green Beret, not because I wanted recognition for that stuff. I did it because I wanted to help people and do something good for people. That's what drove me to those careers. But also there was a part of me that enjoyed being recognized as that person, right? Like, people look at firemen like your local heroes, and Green Berets are badasses, and that I thought that was cool. After that happened, and I like I told you last night, I kind of had a sort of an ego death, I would call it, and I didn't give a shit about any of that anymore.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to appreciate the things I've done more, because it wasn't anymore about like what people thought about it. It was just because it was the right thing to do, and I felt good even better about it.
Sounds pretty positive.
Sure.
Yeah. And meeting Michael Herrera, how did that come about? For context for the audience, Michael Herrera has gone on a couple of podcasts, probably most notably Sean Ryan. And this is a guy who was definitely deployed in Indonesia. He was with his unit, and he sees a craft.
What I remember is kind of like a pyramid shape at the top like this, because I remember seeing some shading, and then it had corners, right? And I remember seeing these vents, at least that's what it looks like, on each of the corners like this. So there's a vent here, and it was positioned on the lines like this. And then on each corner, when this thing took off, it had lights that would pop on, which would have been like red, yellow, green, and blue are the only ones I remember. That kind of had a line that went like this, and it had some sort of scale pattern that I estimate is octagonal, but it could honestly be circular. It could be square. I wasn't close enough to depict it. This was the blackest, darkest thing that I have ever seen in my life.
All of a sudden, this, like, what he thinks maybe is this DOE, Department of Energy, paramilitary unit with far superior weaponry and kind of apparel shows up, basically swears his unit to secrecy, and takes control of the situation. He was later back-channeled with from somebody claiming to be part of the quote unquote legacy UFO program. And this person says, hey, you saw some really gnarly stuff out there. What we were doing is actually, and this is where it gets dark and weird, rounding up people from disaster zones like Indonesia at the time and testing their psionic ability, so their ability to interact with these exotic crafts, so that we could maybe, basically do flight testing with these people. And again, it's just another data point for your story, because you're talking about this kind of mind-matter interaction connection, and they're doing that stuff in Indonesia. And this is a guy, by the way, Michael Herrera, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know him well. I think he runs a very successful business in Colorado. Yeah. Like it's literally zero reason. If anything, he's lost business over coming out.
It did not. Yeah, it doesn't benefit him to do this. Like he did it because the same reason I'm doing it. It was the right thing to do. But yeah, I mean, his story is crazy, man. Like definitely people should look into that because
it's fascinating.
Like who knows how much dark stuff's really going on tied to all this, and if that's why they fight to keep this secret part of this so compartmentalized and secret. I don't know, man.
And how'd you meet him? Was it through your newfound interest in kind of out there stuff from your experience?
Well, yeah. And then some of the stuff he talked about, like he brought up some of the stuff that the unit had. I knew I added some stuff that I thought maybe we chatted on social media and then kind of just became friends through that.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Once you kind of come out of the woodwork, stick your head out of the water, you see that, maybe there's some other people who've experienced some pretty crazy stuff. I've found through my own, research in this area, I think the common misconception is civilians, they're conspiratorial. People in the government, they're like these normies or something. It's the opposite.
Absolutely.
People in the government are more conspiratorial than people outside of the government. And I think it's because there are people like you. You're the extreme version of this, but there are so many people like you who've experienced weird stuff while working in the government, and then it's like this kind of don't look over there, but like you kind of file it away forever, and you kind of saw the little thing in the room Absolutely. You weren't supposed to look at or whatever, and there's a lot of that. Yeah,
it's what we say, like peering behind the curtain. Like once you do that, like you can't go back.
Can't go back. Yeah. I think we're both aware, and it's kind of an open secret at this point. I mean, you have Ross Coulthart saying publicly on News Nation, "There's a story. It's going to break in January. Things are going to get kind of crazy." It seems like an open secret in UFO disclosure world that a lot's going to come out in this area.
It is.
And I think both of us feel that could be extremely positive and extremely negative. And it's a Pandora's box. And I've always formerly been on the side of release as much as we can because I think the public deserves to know the truth. But then it's funny, as you get to this kind of exciting, things are bursting at the seams tipping point, it also gets a little scary, and you realize that there is something adaptive about materialist reductionism and thinking that this world we live in is extremely limited and just like random atoms bouncing off of one another. Like there's something actually very adaptive about that from like leading your life in a normal way on a day-to-day basis. And so how do we lead this in a positive way?
Obviously, based on what I'm doing, my belief is that the truth is what we all need to fight for, right?
Yeah.
Getting the truth out, and I think it's important. But also, maybe there is a component of this there's a reason why some of this was kept back. Maybe there is and I could say that there certainly is part of it that if it was told to everyone would change reality, but ultimately it needs to happen. I just think we have to be ready for it as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like, but I think what you're doing is a huge part of that. I mean, getting awareness out there about it, talking about it. Our reality might not be what we think, and we might have stumbled across this historically in the past, and it might have been bad then,
Well, the point you're getting at, I think, is the fact that we're not alone in the universe is not the tip of the spear. That's not the thing that... It's funny, you hear reporters like Ross Coulthart, Jeremy Corbell, people who are honestly closer than people like me. I'm maybe a little more risk averse as far as speaking to people in and around the quote unquote legacy UFO program. And it seems like they always get to a point in the conversation, at the end of the conversation, where the person on the inside says, you would not be pro-disclosure if you knew everything I knew. And I worry that there's actual merit to that. I do, because I think we're dealing with sacred spiritual things, ontological truths. And at least in the military context, you're talking about that in a using that in instrumental, weaponistic, ways that are kind of not sacred, like for our kind of brutal, needs and desires and geopolitical realities. Mm-hmm. And that's weird territory.
Yeah, man, I think there's a lot of merit to that. There's things I wouldn't want my son, for example, to know. I wouldn't want him to know that that's a true part of reality. So what does that mean for everyone? I don't know. It's a tricky, slippery slope.
It's extremely tricky because, like, you drive around LA, you drive around any major city, Las Vegas, any major city in the US, and you look around, and from a kind of architecture, infrastructure perspective, most of these places have not been, they're crumbling, and they haven't been updated since the 60s and 70s. And now we have, it's interesting, the National Science Foundation officially coming out saying we're looking into extended electrodynamics. And that is basically this new paradigm in science that involves a scalar field, exotic electromagnetic wave types that get into, like, the works of Tesla, this kind of unknown guy named Thomas Townsend Brown, who's now probably being vindicated.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the ability to manipulate gravity through electromagnetism and do all sorts of stuff through, high speed rail. Let's bring the Concorde back with flight that, get to Europe in an hour or whatever. And so that's really important, right? That's important, and ontological truth is important. Sure. And then there are, risk factors as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's this weird technological forcing function where it can be really good and it can be really bad.
Yeah. And I mean, I sure as hell don't know the answer. I hope that we're contributing in a positive way.
I think we have to listen to the people closest to the action on these things. And so it's like the experiencers. You're an experiencer, at least of the technology. And most of those people they come out saying, we're getting a warning that, these things care about our nuclear facilities because that is the center of the apocalypse. If you were to place the end of the world anywhere, it would be at these Q clearance facalities where we could blow up the world.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they're showing up there is probably a warning to, I don't think they're prepping the battle space. I think they are like doing recon on our abilities. I think they're saying, don't blow yourselves up. But I could be right. That's, again, our interpretation. But
well, yeah. And so I can look at that both ways, because I can look at it from just my human open heart way of looking at it and say, yeah, I agree. And then the tactical mindset I have tells me, but we don't prepare for the best case scenario. We prepare for the worst case scenario.
Yes.
Right? And so what is that? And that is they are prepping the battlefield. So we have to observe and be aware and be ready.
Sure. So interesting. I mean, we talked about Diana Pasulka, this religious studies professor.
That's so cool, man.
She's amazing. Yeah. And she wrote a book about modern UFO phenomena as a religious phenomena. And she meant to write about it as a psyop, a psychological opera. She was like, I think this is probably all fake. Then she falls into it and she's like, oh my God, this is very real.
Yeah.
And it's this interesting thing where you stare at the abyss long enough, it starts to stare back or whatever. You fall into it. And she's like, oh my God, this becomes real, and almost realizes that what we are looking at now is what a lot of divine contact experiences have been in the past. And she talks about St. Francis of Assisi, who sees this flaming torch, orb thing on Mount Laverne in, I think, 12th or 13th century Italy. And to him, it's this forcing function towards God. Yeah. And he actually has what seems like electromagnetic radiation as a result of this experience, what we would now call that.
Yeah.
And then actually writes in his diary, the last thing he writes is the Greek letter tau, which means conversion. And so it's like this it's like he had this angelic experience, and it's this forced conversion to Christianity. And then it's called the stigmata, because there was a stigma around his experience. And they talk about modern UFO abduction cases. There's this big stigma, and there's this desire to not disclose. And this, it's so fascinating.
Yeah. I especially like a lot of the stuff she talks about when she talks about all these people that have been key contributors to like rocketry and the way that they got their ideas, and that's wild, man.
Yeah, that the
Like,
fathers.
what are we missing? Like, what do I need to be doing that I'm not doing? You know, like that's kind of shit I started digging into, and you know, I mean, there's something to it.
Well, whenever somebody's doing something kind of trippy or unconventional, but they're also a key contributor in a conventional sense to a core program or capability, you have to look into that. And so in this case, the fathers of all of the space programs, American space program is a guy named Jack Parsons, founded Jet Propulsion Labs. The Russian space program, a guy named Tchaikovsky. And then the German space program, Werner von Braun. All of these guys thought that they were in touch with non-human entities, and they were doing... Tesla's a great example too. Tesla said that he communicated with extraterrestrials in Colorado. So yeah, you have to start maybe taking some of these things seriously. And a lot of these guys say that is actually essential to our, you know, their ability to actually work in these rocketry programs. And so this guy named Tim Taylor, who is a modern NASA mission controller, works with Elon Musk.
Right.
I've met this guy. And I actually am invested in a rocket company, and I was at, you know, it was struggling. And I was like, man, how do we get this thing to work? Because he's this famous NASA mission controller. I was like, give me advice or whatever. And I was grasping at straws. And he goes, you have to think about what they want as far as how to get the rocket to work. And I was like, you mean like non-human intelligence? Yeah.
That's wild.
Wild.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to this guy. I'm like, is he psyoping me? I don't know.
Yeah.
But he's a real NASA mission controller.
Yeah.
Works at the highest level.
Well, dude, look at all the names of the programs.
Right.
Like that should tell you something too, right?
Artemis. And
and you start looking into that.
The iconography, the second century Latin writing.
Exactly, man. Like it starts to, I mean, just keep your eyes open.
Yeah. It feels like 2025 is sort of a consciousness apotheosis of sorts. You have all of these converging, accelerating dynamics, and you have artificial intelligence, you have OpenAI, Anthropic, you know, all sorts of spin outs and offshoots of these organizations that are buying up tons and tons of NVIDIA chips, and in this massive race. And then the US vis-a-vis China, mainly China, but also Russia and, you know, other adversaries. You have this global AI race. You have, you know, the Google quantum Sycamore processor that they just announced that they say might theoretically prove the many worlds hypothesis.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. You have those two things. And then you also have the David Grush revelations that we're talking about today, and that your testimony, you know, really provides more evidence for, which is that we're not alone and that reality is way weirder than we think. And all three of these things seem to be converging. And I interviewed a guy named Matthew Pines, who's pretty connected in the kind of national security world. And he said that, you know, somebody in a very cleared to a lot of things, I think, at the Pentagon, said something like AI, quantum, plus the Grush stuff.
Yeah.
And that iron triangle of dynamics will unleash a whole host of crazy possibilities.
Yeah.
And as, you know, people in the national security state, you know, this guy or whatever, he's like, that's what we're tracking. So
yeah,
how do we make sense of this?
Dude, I mean, I 100% think a lot of these things are connected in some way that we might not quite understand yet. I don't know. I mean, we could theorize about it all day, but I know there are people that are trying to stay ahead of the game on that. And an example of that is my good friend Chris Wright. He's CEO of a company called AITC, the Artificial Intelligence Trust Council. And I'm part of that as well. And the mission for us is to try to slow down the growth of AI, at least to a point where the people have a say in how far this goes. Because right now it's a runaway train and no one really knows what's happening behind the curtain. And there's really no oversight on a potentially the most deadly could be weapon system ever developed.
Yep.
And why I say that is any significant amount of technology that's capable of doing great things is sometimes also capable of great destruction. I'm telling you about drones that you could drop the size of smaller than the palm of your hand. You could drop hundreds of thousands of them out of the back of a C-130 and could be trained to individually seek out and kill individual targets without a human component. To take away the human component from the decision to take a life, I think that's where we're crossing the line we shouldn't cross.
It's extremely dystopian from a warfare perspective, as early as, and probably earlier than this, but like Donald Rumsfeld, I remember, you know, in the Bush 43 admin, Secretary of Defense, his whole thing was we need to roboticize or autonomize American military. And it was probably like too early in the technology curve at the time and sort of got, you know, semi-rejected. Now it feels like that all this stuff is just happening. And once you start to get these envoys that are like doing things on your behalf, you get weird decisions made. And the stories around, you know, fingers, you know, aborts of like nuclear, you know, possibility, like that's always because a human is in the loop.
Exactly.
Right? But you look
at the Russia thing. Right?
Yeah, the Russia thing is a great example. It was in the 80s or something, you know, and where that guy could have, this close, that guy could have caused you know, global cataclysm, and because of his own moral conscience and no superior, he, you know, didn't basically activate the nuke.
Yeah, what an AI system have done? It would have made the decision immediately to just neutralize the threat.
It would have been a cold, hard calculation, zero intuition.
Yep.
And I think there's something about, you know, the whole AI conversation, which is that the brain is a Turing machine, and it's this, you know, calculator on steroids. And so if the brain is just this calculator, we're going to recreate consciousness via AI. And I think it's this total misnomer and misunderstanding of the brain. I, in fact, think we learn with low data sets. Babies come out of the womb with some understanding of grammar, a fear of snakes, you know, all sorts of things.
This is encoded in something deeper, right?
Way deeper. And we're not learning through these large data sets. There's something very different about remote viewing, right? How do you explain
the 100th
that?
monkey. You ever hear about the 100th monkey?
No, what's the 100th? I want to hear that.
You didn't know about.
Yeah, there's a lot I don't know about.
No, so I'm paraphrasing, man. So I'm probably getting hammered on this, but island of monkeys, certain type of monkey. I think it's in Japan that they have a species of monkeys that's separated by an island, the same species, but they're separated and they never interact with each other. Okay. They were doing experiments. They were dropping these potatoes on the island, and they were getting covered in dirt and sand when they dropped them on the beach. And one of the monkeys figured out, if I just take it to the water and wash it off, then I can eat it without the sand, right? Simple thing. Well, it taught the other monkeys how to do it. And quickly, the whole island knew how to do that. As soon as that, they call it the 100th monkey, as soon as a certain number of monkeys were realized this is what they do, suddenly and instantaneously, the other islands started doing it. And so they don't know exactly what that mechanism is, but they think there's some kind of component of consciousness that's tied to that, that's allowing that to jump.
I think so.
And so, and there's other studies to that too. Like you saw the Stanford did the one with the light and the plants.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of that that's starting to like come out in science that's showing us that consciousness might be, there's a component to that that's you know, we don't understand at all.
Well, we might have.
It's deeper.
Yeah. Speaking of like uploading consciousness to the cloud and how weird that sounds from an AI perspective, that might be going on with our consciousness. Like we might have a client server side interaction with our consciousness, but that's way more magical and robust. And so a good example is the Bannister effect, where upload times are slower than download times. So breaking the 4-minute mile as the first person is going to be much harder than downloading that, you know, going
that
forward.
Already exists,
And there's a guy named Rupert Sheldrake who studies all this stuff, and he says that once if you grow a first crystal structure of its kind, it takes a long amount of time, because he thinks that that's proof that it's drawing from the local information field that hasn't been done before, so it takes a while for that new crystal structure. You grow that same crystal structure after that, it becomes much faster. Yes.
If you make a new chemical compound for the first time and you crystallize it, that crystal form won't have existed before because it's a new compound. And the more often you crystallize it, the easier it should get for crystals of that kind to form. And in fact...
That's amazing.
Well, it is actually really well known to chemists that new compounds are very difficult to crystallize. You maybe wait years before you get the first crystal. But thereafter, it gets easier to crystallize all around the world.
That's insane. That's crazy. I think about sometimes athletic accomplishments too, where somebody pushes the bar just a little bit farther, and then all of a sudden it just seems easier or something, ostensibly. And like you could attribute that to like modern doping or something, but I think it's something more than that. It's almost as if an accomplishment that formerly was thought to be impossible is uploaded to a central monad or repository or something. And then if somebody calls upon it with the right resonance in the future, you know, it's that much easier because you have more data in the repository or something like that. He also shows that if 1,000 people or 10,000 people do a crossword puzzle and a new person does that crossword puzzle the next day, they'll finish it a little bit faster than a random crossword puzzle that nobody has done prior.
So that ties into the same thing with the 100th Monkey Man.
Same thing, 100th Monkey. And just innovation popping up at different places around the world at the same time. The invention of the wheel or the invention of all sorts of things.
Diane talks about that too, right? Where what rocketry kind of happening like simultaneous in different places.
Why is it happening in Russia and the U.S. and then later in Germany all at the same time? Yeah. There's some sort of maybe predetermined arc of technology. And then you look at how science occurs, and it's way more revelatory if you actually look at the descriptions from the scientists.
Yeah.
They're not like, I calculated X, Y, Z, and then the answer came to me. It came to the architecture of the hydrogen atom came to Wolfgang Pauli in a dream.
Right.
The rock equation came to him while he was staring at the fire. This idea that the mind is fully separate from an objective material world, I think that'll probably go away pretty soon.
Yeah. There's a concept out there where I forget who said it, but they talk about us being like a receiver.
Yes.
And that the consciousness field is like the signal, and then we're just tapping into that field, right? I think that's a cool analogy that actually makes a lot of sense when you start to answer some of these questions of how this is happening, right?
Totally.
I like that analogy, though. That kind of sits well with me.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, transmission theory of consciousness. Yeah,
we're just tapping in, man.
Totally.
Tapping in.
Yeah, and maybe our job is to like work on us as receivers, like work on the the energy field.
Well, if you think
it.
about it like that too, like we're almost like a technology ourselves, and if you eat healthy and you work out, the signal's better.
Yeah.
Right. You
Yeah.
get better information, better downloads. You know.
Well, what's happening when you daydream? Are you constructing those thoughts actively? No, it seems like that you're receiving things from elsewhere. Like if you're in a dreamlike state, you are not consciously creating the semantic thoughts, but they're pouring in. And there's this question in neuroscience of like the binding problem. Like they know how all the disparate parts of your brain work. You know, Broca's area is speech.
Right.
You know, Wernicke's area is reading comprehension. But we don't know how it blends together into the seamless perception.
And then they can remove a part that's supposed to do this thing, and then it will find a way around and to rewrite and do it anyway.
Exactly.
So,
it's somehow malleable and understands how to.
Yeah.
And it's like a radio. Like if you were to remove the capacitor or the battery of the radio, maybe the music would stop playing or not play in the right way. But you really need to know that it's tapping into an electromagnetic field via this antenna. Yeah. The field's still there. And that's the thing tapping into, you know, Vivaldi's Four Seasons or whatever's playing, you know, like it's the field. It's not, you know, locally being produced inside of you.
What do you think, like just your opinion on that? Is that like the Planck field? Is that where that sits? Is that it? Is that
gets into stuff that's way smarter than me and deeper than me, but I think there's a sub-quantum field that deals with quantum potentials, so vector and scalar potentials that deal with actually what we were talking about before as far as anomalies in electromagnetism, where this guy named Lorentz, who had this equation where he set the derivatives of the vector and scalar potentials to zero, but in fact, I think Oliver Heaviside, who kind of, you know, was one of the fathers of electromagnetism, knew this, and basically, I think there's another field involving scalar and vector potentials, and that explains these anomalies in electromagnetism, like the Aronoff-Bohm effect, where you don't have electric fields or magnetic fields present, but you do have these potentials present.
Right.
And so maybe a lot arises around these potentials, and maybe the potentials themselves are sort of the quantum code, if you will, of the universe, which is kind of information theoretic a la John Wheeler. And again, I'm speaking about things that are well beyond my pay grade, but these are
but it ties into the same thing. And I also have you heard of the E8 theory, where it's like the 8-dimensional quasi crystal is projecting reality onto? Oh man, look into that. Did you dig that? Because that gets a little beyond my understanding of it. Because I just this is like hobby level, like looking into it for me.
Me too.
I don't have that kind of I don't have the background, but they talk about this that our reality is a projection from an 8th-dimensional plane, and and they can correlate that with all the different particles that tie into. And the way they describe it's really cool. Like they show a 2-dimensional depiction of a 3-dimensional crystal on as a shadow, and they show you how it moves and rotates when they rotate the 3-dimensional piece. And they say if you can imagine that 8 levels up, and like that's how that's projecting down into 3D.
That's fast.
That's pretty cool, man.
Well, it's almost like, this, like you have these platonic solids, these, platonic objects that like a tesseract.
Right.
You cannot visualize a tesseract.
No.
You can only see the shadow of a tesseract.
Right. And that's a 3D
And that's a 3D
object
rendering of this higher thing. And then you have to ask, is the world itself a 3D rendering of this higher thing going on? Which goes back to like Plato's cave. And are we just rendering it in this like kind of low level substrate that's all we can kind of comprehend?
And then that's the quantum, the double slit experiment that would explain, how we collapse the wave function with consciousness, right?
I think an extremely valid hypothesis that's actually consistent with the Copenhagen school's interpretation that measurement collapses the wave function is that there's something actually about our minds that collapse the wave function. And every serious quantum field theorist entertained this at the time. And now you have modern quantum theorists saying, no, it's just the particles kind of, once they interact, once the waves interact, they collapse into particles or whatever. Right. And it's like, well, what about like what Schrodinger himself thought, or what about what, von Neumann thought?
Well, it's like, Sean Carroll talks about this. He's got like a very strict view on this, where it's like, this is just how the math plays out or whatever. And then you go like the other extreme where it's like, no, this is saying that consciousness is collapsing the wave function. And so is it actually when they say this, and I don't know exactly the right answer to this, are they saying that the actual act of measurement or just the act of observing? Which one?
So Copenhagen school keeps it very humble in their claims, and they just say the act of measurement collapses the wave function. And I'm glad you brought up Sean Carroll, because he's the most popular kind of quantum guy now. And what he'll say is reality itself, quantum reality itself, is probabilistic. But that is totally antagonistic. And that is and I'm a fan of Sean Carroll, and he's like explained all sorts of things that like a stupid person like me can understand, so I'm grateful to him. But he'll say things like reality is fundamentally probabilistic, like somehow Schrodinger's wave equation, which is probabilistic, is the substrate of reality. Schrodinger himself would talk about Schrodinger's cat existing in superposition, right, as a joke, because he did, and there's even clips of Roger Penrose being like,
he wasn't serious.
He wasn't serious. He didn't actually think that the cat could exist in superposition.
He was almost using it as a way of like showing the ridiculousness.
Showing how ridiculous and weird, as far as ontological truth, the quantum stuff points to, but saying we actually probably need to figure this out.
People often say, well, maybe with a sufficient technicality, we could build a Schrodinger's cat. That was not what Schrodinger's point was. He was saying this is ridiculous. You can't really have a cat which is dead and alive at the same time.
But it was a mere illustration of a wider point, right?
That's right.
I love how science and this esoteric thinking and science is all kind of coming together in this unique way. It's like you could look at it anyway, from any perspective, and you could find some truth,
It's awesome, man. Well, okay, so there's a lot of consciousness raising we're going to get out of this. There might be some bad. This is a Pandora's box. Things are going to get crazy. How do we prepare for a world where this sort of, stuff that's been kind of held in the back closet just gets busted wide open?
As far as just being prepared, dude, like if that worst case scenario is what happens, I think people need to start. Awareness is key, right? Starting to be aware of what's going on. Start digging in. Start identifying for you what's true. Use your discernment. Look into companies like RAITC that's trying to be a buffer for some of this and prevent the proliferation of AI and all these things. Join movements like ours. Go to your local people in your local area. In Vegas, I have my company, Bravo One Defense. I teach people how to do basic survival stuff, how to operate a weapon safely, pistol, rifle, long range rifle. Go to your people in your local area that know that kind of stuff and train. Learn how to be proficient with a weapon. So in case you need to use one, you can. Learn some basic survival skills. How much food would you need to store to survive 6 months with the grid down? What kind of food would you want to store? If you can't cook. I mean, other than open flame, like there's things you need to think about that maybe a lot of people aren't prepared for and know what to do. And as soon as they don't have a grocery store to get their things, are they going to be able to function? I mean, and also be prepared to defend yourself, because if you're not, then you're just collecting shit for the toughest guy in your neighborhood,
Yeah.
That's a joke that I think Bill Burr said. I thought it was hilarious. Yeah. He's like, I feel like I'm just collecting shit from the toughest guy in my neighborhood. He started just preparing and getting ready. Yeah. But yeah, so, I mean, train, be ready, be aware.
Well, I think there was that moment right when the pandemic hit.
Right.
You had COVID-19 where it was like, all of a sudden, we didn't quite know what the thing was. We were like all like about to lock down. And there was this extremely ominous feeling of like, is this actually the end of like the US as we know it?
Yeah.
And it ended up not really being that. But I think keeping that little sense memory in mind is probably a healthy thing.
I mean, that was a real minor flu comparatively to anything serious.
Well, we didn't learn any lesson, right? So like the lessons would be, we should produce our own PPE, protective equipment in the U.S.
Yes.
We were dependent on the country from which COVID came for protective equipment.
And they were tapped because they were using it.
Totally. Mm-hmm. So like at the very least, like, we traded self-sufficiency for basically cheaper TVs on the coasts or whatever.
Over and over again.
Over again. And so like some sort of lesson around, internal self-sufficiency, sovereignty, and, rebuilding the American manufacturing base should have been the bare minimum takeaway. And it feels like we've done none of that. And in April or May of 2020, you have, chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, saying, let's print a F ton of money and just infused, our system. And you have this thing called the Cantillon effect, where that just accrues directly to equities, to the equity holding class. The rich got way richer. The amount of billionaires, I don't know if it's doubled or, by an order of magnitude expanded. Wow. And then, the rest of the country sort of left on, UBI for a temporary period. And like, a lot of businesses got gutted. And so talk about not learning the lesson, right? I mean, it's almost like we got redirected. And then simultaneous to all of that, I think some spiritual energy entered. And I think we're sort of moved off our zombie path. And I think we've awoken to real truths in the world.
I like the way you put that, man. That's I kind of feel like that too. Like I feel definitely more awake in more recent times from all this.
Totally.
Like, more aware. Just, I didn't feel like I was this aware of everything before, right? I mean, it feels different.
Same. And I think it's, do you experience it being, 'cause for me, it's been harder, but better and rewarding. And so it was almost like initially, especially, you feel like, you're undergoing like hard changes to make yourself a better person.
Yeah.
But then on the other end of that, you're like, oh my God, like it was like almost like you were a zombie before, and you're kind of awake to all these realities in a really positive way.
100%.
Yeah,
exactly
man.
How I feel. Absolutely.
Well, I hope the world wakes up, man. And I think by you telling your story, I know you're going to play it down, but I do think you are just adding to this renaissance of consciousness and thought and ideas, as far as people knowing that there's a lot more out there.
Yeah, man. And our reality is just fine. Like we don't need to upload to the cloud.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, I think if our reality is as strange as, involving gauntlets, emitting hieroglyphics and orbs levitating, we should figure that stuff out before we, drop into The Sims.
And just bear with it a little bit till January, because who knows,
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. Hopefully they don't just information dump a bunch of shit that screws up our reality. But
I'm with you in that. And I wonder how much, any of that comes out dovetails with what you have to say. Because I think what's interesting about all of this is like, it all corroborates and it all checks. And like you speak to Grush, and it's like, he'll bring up, these names of the people who started the clearance system for UFOs, like Robert Starbacher and Oppenheimer. And then you do all this open source research, and you start to build this narrative of like the last 75 years of our history from like a US government perspective is not what it seems. And then simultaneous to that, you have this promise from the new Trump administration to disclose all of these kind of dark truths in the American past. And let's see.
Hopefully he does, but let's see.
Yeah, right.
A lot of presidents have promised this.
Well, the traditional thing is that you go up against the power structure. You know, JFK wanted to scatter the CIA to the winds. Look at what happened to him. Nixon wanted to reduce the CIA by a third as force reduction. And there's some, interesting narratives as to how he might have been kind of pushed out, for the 5 burglars at Watergate were CIA agents. Yeah, kind of wild. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see it play out. It's going to get interesting, though.
It certainly is, man.
Yeah.
Be prepared, everyone.
Well, Randy, this has been a pleasure, man. Honored that you, gave me the time here, and I'm excited for people to see this, and hopefully we learn something maybe from the aftermath of all the independent researchers out there looking into the hieroglyphic symbols.
Yeah, man.
The levitating orb. There are a lot of this. It's almost like this. Your story begets more questions than answers, but I think that's often the case.
Yeah.
Awesome, man.
Well, sir, appreciate meeting with you and working with you here, and thank you so much, man.
Right back at you. All right. Was Randy shown this technology as a weapons expert to see if he could figure it out, reverse engineer it on the spot, as a litmus test to see how an exposed adversary might react? In many ways, this interview begets more questions than answers, but 3 things are clear. Number 1, Randy's credentials and background are beyond reproach, and we have an abundance of artifacts to prove that. Number 2, we should be infinitely grateful for his courage in speaking out about his experience. And number 3, this story is unequivocally worthy of follow-ups and further investigation. I want to thank Randy for his courage and selflessness in speaking out. If anyone needs help with self-defense, self-sufficiency, or disaster preparation in the Vegas area, please reach out to him at Bravo1 Defense on Instagram. Until next time, I'm Jesse Michels, and this is American Alchemy.